Hi there, welcome to my YouTube channel Dhyani classes. If you're watching my video for the first time, do subscribe my channel, hit the bell icon so that you get notified whenever new video will be uploaded. So in today's video we will cover the first part of the chapter Lost Spring, and this chapter talks about a story of a stolen childhood written by Anish Jung from class 12 CBSE. So let's get started. Let's talk about the author. Anish Jung was born in Rourkela in 1964 and spent her childhood and adolescence in Hyderabad. She received her education in Hyderabad and in the United States of America. Her parents were both writers. Anish Jung began her career as a writer in India. She has been an editor and columnist for major newspapers in India and abroad and has authored several books. The following is an excerpt from her book titled Lost Spring, Stories of Stolen Childhood. Through the lesson, she analyzes the grinding poverty and traditions which condemn these children to a life of exploitation. Let's notice these expressions in the text, infer their meaning from the context. Looking for means to search for something. Dark hutmates means broken or dark huts. Roof over his head means living in a shelter or a house. Slog their daylight hours means working hard throughout the day. Perpetual state of poverty means state of poverty. Impose the baggage on the child means workload on child. So Anish Jung talking about the poverty and child labor, especially the street children who are suffering from workload since their childhood, and instead of going to the school they do work throughout the day, and in this way their life becomes miserable and the government do not care about them and imposing more burden of work in a various way. So in this story there are two main characters named Sahib and Mukesh. So Sahib is a rag picker whereas Mukesh works as a bangle maker. So let's begin with the first paragraph of the chapter now. Sometimes I find a rupee in the garbage. So here the author is saying that he finds a rupee in the garbage. So what do you mean by garbage? Garbage refers to waste material that people dump outside in the garbage station. So she saw a rag picker named Sahib and he was busy picking rag from that heap of garbage, and he said to the author that sometime I finds a rupee in the garbage. So from this point the author and Sahib started their conversation. Why do you do this? I asked Sahib, whom I encounter every morning scrounging for gold in the garbage dumps of my neighborhood. So here every day in the morning she used to see this boy named Sahib and he just kept looking for rag from her neighborhood. That means he just kept looking for rag from her surrounding place of her house. And one fine day she stopped him and asked, why do you do this? Because she sees him every day scrounging for gold. That means every day Sahib used to seek or find something valuable such as pieces of metal and so on in garbage and considering it as gold or something precious as gold from the garbage. Further she says Sahib left his home long ago. So here Sahib might have told her from where he came, and he said he left his house long ago and says set amidst the green fields of Dhaka. His home is not even a distant memory. So here Sahib was from Dhaka and Dhaka is the capital city of Bangladesh. So he lived in the middle of the green fields of Dhaka and he left his house long ago and his home is not even a distant memory. That means he even does not know where his house is situated in Dhaka. So distant memory means something that happened long ago, and amidst refers to between or mid. There were many storms that swept away their fields and homes, his mother tells him. So here Sahib tells a story and says his mother had told him that they had left the house because there were many storms that destroyed and swept away their houses and fields in Bangladesh, and it was very difficult for them to survive and there was no means of livelihood, and that's why they had left Dhaka. So in this way Sahib replied here, why did he do this rag picking and from where he came? That's why they left looking for gold in the big city where he now lives. So here Sahib says that that's why he left Bangladesh and looking for gold. That means looking for valuable waste material to sell so that they can survive in this big city where he is living right now. Further, Sahib says, I have nothing else to do, he mutters, looking away. That means then he muttered in a soft voice that I don't have any work to do except rag picking. And again he started looking for waste materials, and then the author says, go to school. I say glibly, realizing immediately how hollow the advice must sound. So immediately the narrator told him to go to school. That means instead of rag picking, you should go to school. And says, I said glibly. That means without knowing Sahib's financial condition or his living standard. She advised him to go to school, and then immediately she realized that this is not logical to say him to go to school, because taking admission into the school is not possible or very hard, especially who is rag picker or garbage picker and a person who is suffering from poverty. So hollow means meaningless and glibly means lack of careful thought. Further, he says, there is no school in my neighborhood. So immediately Sahib replied that there is no school nearby his house, and says, when they build one, I will go. So he says when there is a school where he lives, he assured her that he will go to school when one is built near his house. If I start a school, will you come? I asked, half joking. So here the author asked him in a joking manner that suppose I build a school, will you come or will you take admission to come? And then Sahib replied, yes, he says, smiling broadly. So he got happy and said, yes, definitely I will come if you build a school. Further, he says, a few days later I see him running up to me. Is your school ready? So here the author is saying that after a few days later he came back to her and said, is your school ready? That means he wanted to know whether she built a school or not, because earlier she had promised him that I am going to build a school, and he assured her if she will build a school, definitely he will join the school. So he was very happy because he wanted to go to school. Further, she says, it takes longer to build a school. I say, embarrassed at having made a promise that was not meant. So as she made a false promise to him, and she never expected that this boy would come back and would ask, is your school ready? So while he was asking her this question, she felt embarrassed because as a joke she had made a false promise. So embarrassed refers to feeling ashamed or humiliated. But promises like mine abound in every corner of his bleak world. So here the author is saying that she felt that there are so many promises that people used to make him, and Sahib was habitual of such false promises like this in his bleak world. That means in his empty world, but no promise made to Sahib was ever fulfilled. After months of knowing him, I asked him his name. Sahib-e-Alam, he announces. So here, as she knew him for a month, and then one day she asked him, what is your name? And he said, my name is Sahib-e-Alam. He does not know what it means. So after knowing his name, she felt really this boy does not know the meaning of his name, and says if he knew its meaning, Lord of the universe, he would have a hard time believing it. So here the author is saying that it will be very hard for him to know the meaning of his name, and as per the author, Lord of the universe, it is the real meaning of Sahib-e-Alam. So once he will get to know the meaning of his name, it will be very hard for him to believe, as he was a rag picker and leading his miserable life. Unaware of what his name represents, he roams the streets with his friends, an army of barefoot boys who appear like the morning birds and disappear at noon. So here the author is saying that Sahib was unaware the meaning of his name, and says he roams the street with a friend. That means he went around the streets with a group of rag pickers without slippers, and the author is calling their group as an army of barefoot. And this army appear a morning bird, because you can see rag pickers early in the morning nearby the heap of the garbage, and then disappeared at noon. Over the months I have come to recognize each of them. So she says that after a few months later, she started to recognize each of them, the way they are talking and how they are eating and all. And once she asked, why aren't you wearing chappals? I asked one. That means she asked one of them that why are you not wearing chappals, because she noticed that they were roaming the streets barefooted. My mother did not bring them down from the shelf, he answered simply. So here when she asked one of them that why aren't you wearing chappals, So he replied that my mother did not bring the chappals down from the shelf, and said, even if she did, he will throw them off. Add another who is wearing shoes that do not match. So here there was a boy who wore a pair of shoes that did not match at all, and he replied to her that his mother had given him chappal, he would have thrown them off. So author here got to know that their stage of poverty and the way they are leading their life, and it was very difficult for them to arrange a pair of slippers, and says when I comment on it, he shuffles his feet and says nothing. So when she had a look at his shoes, he shuffles his feet, which means he started dragging his leg without lifting, and without saying anything he tried to hide his shoes because he was wearing shoes that did not match, and he understood that the author is looking at his shoes. So shuffles refers to dragging one's feet without lifting or moving. And then, I want shoes, says a third boy who has never owned a pair all of his life. So there was another rag picker who said that I want shoes and I never had owned a pair of shoes all his life. Traveling across the country, I have seen children walking barefoot in cities on village roads. So here the author is saying that she keeps traveling across the country, and during her travel, she had seen many children walking barefoot or without chappals, especially in cities, and sometime roaming on village roads. It is not lack of money, but a tradition to stay barefoot is one explanation. So here the author met several rag pickers during her travel, and she got to know that it is not a lack of money that they are walking barefoot, but it is their tradition to remain barefoot, and they are habitual to walk without a pair of shoes or slipper. Further, she says, I wonder if this is only an excuse to explain away a perpetual state of poverty. So here she saw children were walking without slippers, and when she asked one of them, the author got surprised that they were trying to escape by giving different reasons for not having pair of shoes or slippers, and everybody replied that they are suffering from perpetual state of poverty. That means they were suffering from never ending poverty, and state of poverty the only reason why they are walking barefoot. So wonder means surprise or amazement. I remember a story a man from Udupi once told me. So here the author recalled a story of a man from Udupi, and he told something about this to the author Anish Jung. As a young boy, he would go to school past an old temple where his father was a priest. So a man from Udupi once told a story of his own to the author, and says when he was a young boy, he used to go to school and would pass an temple, and in that temple his father was priest, and says he would stop briefly at the temple and pray for a pair of shoes. So as he used to go to school, on the way there was a temple, and he stops there for a while and used to pray every day for a pair of shoes because he does not have shoes at that time. 30 years later, I visited his town and the temple, which was now drowned in an air of desolation. So here the author is saying that after 30 years later, she visited his town, and then she went to the temple where he used to pray for a pair of shoes, and says which was now drowned in an air of desolation. That means she saw that the temple looking like a destroyed and useless property, and was nearly empty, and there were not many people around the temple. So drowned refers to drench or sink, and desolation means state of destruction or blackness. Further he says, in the backyard where lived the new priest, there were red and white plastic chairs. So now she went to the backyard of the temple, and she saw there were red and white plastic chairs were lying or kept in the backyard of the temple where a new priest lived. A young boy dressed in a grey uniform wearing socks and shoes arrived panting and threw his school bag on a folding bed. So here the author is saying that she saw the new priest and his young boy who came running, and he was breathing very heavily, and he was wearing grey colored school uniforms such as socks and shoes, and then he threw his bag on a folding bed, and says, looking at the boy, I remembered the prayer another boy who had made to the goddess when he had finally got a pair of shoes, let me never lose them. So here when she looked at this boy, she recalled a story of a man from Udupi who used to pray for a pair of shoes, and when he got a pair of shoes, he prayed to the goddess that he may never lose the shoes that he had got. So here the author is describing the financial condition of the priest had improved over the last 30 years. Further, she says the goddess had granted his prayer. So the goddess has granted his prayer as the boy never lost his shoes. Young boys like the son of the priest now wore shoes. So now the priest can buy a pair of shoes for his child because of his financial condition at that time, and he was able to buy a pair of shoes. But many others like the rag pickers in my neighborhood remain shoeless. So on the contrary, she is saying that the boys like a rag pickers in her neighborhood remain without footwear throughout their life, and their perpetual state of poverty will never change. My acquaintances with the barefoot rag pickers leads me to Simapuri. So here the author is saying that she used to talk to the rag pickers, and then she got to know about Simapuri where rag pickers live, and she went to that area to know more about the rag pickers and their state of poverty. But many others like the rag pickers in my neighborhood remain shoeless. So on the contrary, she is saying that the boys like a rag pickers in her neighborhood remain without footwear throughout their life, and their perpetual state of poverty will never change. My acquaintances with the barefoot rag pickers leads me to Simapuri. So here the author is saying that she used to talk to the rag pickers, and then she got to know about Simapuri where rag pickers live, and she went to that area to know more about the rag pickers and their state of poverty. Further, she says a place on the periphery of Delhi yet miles away from it metaphorically. So here, as you know, that Simapuri is located in the border area of New Delhi, and says though Delhi is a capital city of India, and it is very sad to say that this area is very different from the capital where rag pickers lives, and this border area of the capital city shows that still outside areas of the capital city are still undeveloped, and people are leading a miserable life there. So metaphorically means comparing something between two things, and periphery means a boundary or edge area. Those who live here are squatters who came from Bangladesh back in 1971. So here she is saying that people who live in Simapuri came from Bangladesh back in 1971, and these people are squatters. That means that they occupied land without any government approval and settled there. Sahib's family is among them. So Sahib also came from Bangladesh with his parents like other rag pickers and lived in Simapuri. Further, she says Simapuri was then a wilderness. It still is, but it is no longer empty. So she is saying that before 1971 this place Simapuri was a wilderness. That means it was completely empty and an undeveloped area it was, and still there are no development at all, but now it is no longer empty. That means this place is fully occupied by rag pickers. In structures of mud with roof of tin and tarpaulin, devoid of sewage, drainage and running water, live 10,000 rag pickers. So here the narrator is saying that they live in a house made of mud, and they have a tin and tarpaulin roofs, and there was no sewage, drainage or running water facility there in Simapuri, and people were leading their life in a dirty place, and almost 10,000 rag pickers lived there with their families. So devoid means without or lacking something. They have lived here for more than 30 years without an identity. So here the author is saying that rag pickers had been living in this area illegally with their families for more than 30 years without an identity such as valid proof of nationality, driving license, etc. And says without permits but with ration cards that get their names on voter lists and enable them to buy grain. That means even they don't have any permit to do their business as per their wish, but they have a ration card. So the local authority of this place has provided them ration cards so that they can apply for voter cards and then cast their votes in favor of the politician who had helped them in providing ration cards in order to buy grains at a very low price. Food is more important for survival than an identity. So here the author is saying that food is more important for them than having an identity. So this is the end of the first part of the chapter Lost Spring. Let's look at the second part of the chapter in my next video. For more informative videos, do subscribe my channel, hit the bell icon so that you get notified whenever new video will be uploaded. So thank you so much for watching once again. Stay safe, stay healthy.